Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I'm Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Well, Tony, in the 60 seconds right before we hit record, the two of us managed to reference in some order Brett Saberhagen, Skittle Brau, and Fruit Stripe Gum. And it was actually a somewhat coherent conversation. And that all happened about 60 seconds in a row right before. And it was all tied into the theme of
Yes.
today's show, which you wouldn't think would be possible, but here we are.
And if you want more insights like that, you can find us over at BuckeyeInsiders.com. You can sign up. It's not all fruit stripe gum and Skittle Brow talk. There is actual, honest to God football talk and a lot of it. And we even had some posts today said, hey, this is just thanks for the football talk. Thanks for, I'm just reading and I'm enjoying it. So if you're into fall camp stuff, X's and O's, the coming college football season, look, we welcome you over there. Would love to see you over there. But the point of today's show is to discuss, one, Jay Timmons loses his black stripe, freshman nickelback for Ohio State. We did have a listener question on the message board asking to compare Devin Sanchez from this time last year to Jay Timmons this time this year. And I thought it was an interesting question, and we can discuss more of the Jay Timmons situation as well. But I think the biggest difference for me between the two, Tom, is that Devin Sanchez was not solidified with the ones the first weekend of camp. And I think the only reason Timmons wasn't out there with the ones the first day of camp was because there was no nickel the first day of camp. It was two corners and three linebackers. And so once they went to nickel, it was Jay Timmons. And, last year, good luck moving ahead of Jermaine Matthews and Davis Nigbenos and if you're Devin Sanchez. So for me, that is the big thing right now is that, and Timmons was with the ones and Sanchez got some time maybe with the ones a little bit last year in camp and in practice. But I'd say Sanchez had more guys ahead of him. But I also wonder in terms of their development and how ready they are, Devin had said himself, like, he had some rough moments last year and that was frustrating. So it'll be interesting to see how ready Jay Timmons is this season when we finally see him out there.
Yeah, I think Jay Timmons is sort of at least on par with where Devin Sanchez was this time last year. Devin Sanchez lost his black stripe on August 6th, but you got to remember the season started. I think the first game was August 30th or August 31st. So camp was about a week earlier. So Jay Timmons losing his black stripe 6 days on the calendar later than Devin Sanchez did. That's really about the same amount of time into fall camp. So, when you put the apply the seasonal adjustment, I think you've got two guys who are basically right about at the same level. And last year you had Lorenzo Styles at the nickel and Devin Sanchez was the guy who was the dime week one against Texas. It seems certainly right now like Jay Timmons is on track to be the guy who was the nickel for Ohio State week one against Ball State and week two against Texas. But I think you've got guys who are at least broadly in a similar spot, and it's a little hard to compare things over, across the years because you don't have a veteran like Lorenzo Styles coming back to be that nickel this year. But you did have Terry Moore, the transfer safety from Duke, and we had sort of come out of spring assuming it was going to be Earl Little at the nickel and Terry Moore at that deep safety spot, and instead they've moved Earl Little there. So if you sort of apply the same thinking that we do with the offensive line, where it's kind of who are the best five, and then what's the alignment to get those five guys on the field at the same time, it certainly seems to me like the coaching staff is saying the best three in terms of the two safety spots in the nickel is Earl Little, Jalen McClain, and Jay Timmons, and then this is how it sort of sorts out.
Yeah, if they're going to bounce back between nickel and the 4-3 with three linebackers, it makes sense that you would want the best cover guy in that nickel spot rather than a third safety. Because that was always one of the concerns we talked about when it was looking like it was going to be three safeties. It's like, okay, you're going to have to disguise or protect that safety that is playing nickel that is going to have to defend. And that's where the conversations about like Keontae Scott, you disguise him or you protect him by having him attack into the backfield rather than covering it as much as Lorenzo Styles had to do. You'd have to play more zone to to handle that, and you'd have to play more zone when you're playing three linebackers anyway. But with Timmons, if he can do it, then it kind of just, all right, this is plan A, and plan A or plan A B is the three linebackers. And then if you can find some room for Terry Moore, some packages or whatever, if they find something that everybody can do, by all means go ahead and do that. But the idea of a starting, not even starting, just your number one nickel is a true freshman, Tom. A while back, I mentioned the fact that Antoine Winfield was the number one nickel as a freshman, kind of the number one nickel as a sophomore as well. And you correctly said, we can't use that name when we're comparing anybody. It's not fair. But the lineage of freshman nickels at Ohio State, are you ready? So we'll begin with Antoine Winfield in 1995, then go to Nate Clements in 1998, then to Donte Whitner in 2004, and then Malcolm Jenkins in 2005. Now, not since then have we really seen the top nickel is a true freshman. And I just gave you 4 first rounders and 4 All-Americans and 2 Thorpe Award winners in there. So I can give you all of their numbers in a bit. I'll give you all of their numbers, and you tell me what we should expect from Jay Timmons. But if he ends up being the starting nickel as a true freshman, this is the class that he's going to become a part of, at least in terms of the college portion or the initial college portion. We'll see what happens beyond that, but that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, that is pretty crazy. I was just double checking. Yeah, Nate Clements was the 21st overall pick coming out of college. That was the only one I didn't know for 100% off the top of my head. But yeah, that for a 1,000% or 1,000 batting average for guys being starters as freshmen at nickel and then being first round picks. That feels like that is there's probably some causation there, and it's not just correlation. There's some real notable correlation there. I think that this is, in terms of numbers, we'll get into the numbers, and I think the numbers are going to be a little bit dependent on the teams that they play, where you're going to be, if you're the nickel last year, it felt like Lorenzo Styles didn't come off the field much. This year, you're probably going to see, as football trends a little bit more towards 12 personnel and you're getting a little bit away from the 3 wide receiver formations, you're probably going to see a little bit less nickel than you did in a few more 3 linebacker lineups. So you may see the numbers just for the nickel position on the whole trend down a little bit in terms of snaps and in terms of some of the production numbers. But just the fact that he's at the point that we're having this conversation, where if you're having the conversation and here's the entire club and you are a part of this club and the other 4 guys in the club are all former first round draft picks and 2 of them were Thorpe Award winners, like, yeah, that's a pretty good club to be a member of already.
It is impressive. So in terms of projecting, I don't think we've done one of our expectation shows on Jay Timmons and thrown out some stats. So we can go into this completely clean. Let me give you Antoine Winfield's stat line as a true freshman. You just tell me, do you think this is a little outrageous or improbable? So 56 tackles. He had 45 solo tackles, which was 3rd or 4th on the team. On the 1995 team, he had 11 assists, but 5 tackles for loss, 3 forced fumbles, all in one game, no interceptions. So 56 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 3 forced fumbles. I feel like that's a bit too much to expect here.
Yeah, that's a bit too much. I mean, you want me to give you Lorenzo Styles Jr.'s numbers from last year? Because I feel like that's okay. So that's kind of the other side of this, where football has changed a good bit since the late 90s. Lorenzo Styles last year, 12 games, 30 tackles total, 18 solo, 12 assists, 1.5 tackles for loss, 3 passes broken up. That feels like that's probably a little more in the range that we're probably talking about. Even those might be a little bit high if you, again, are assuming they may be in a little bit more of the 4-3 this year as opposed to the 4-2-5 that they were in almost as a base, I think, last year.
Yeah, and Antoine Winfield is the only one of these four with the tackle for loss, and I think Jay Timmons will match. He'll become the next.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw a few of them on this past weekend. The next most stats here, Malcolm Jenkins with 37 tackles, 2 pass breakups, and no interceptions, no tackles for loss. 37 tackles, I think, again, is high. You're telling me this Lorenzo Styles thing, and I feel like those are pretty interesting numbers, and I might be somewhere between 37 and 30. But how do you feel about the Malcolm Jenkins 37 tackles?
It's certainly possible, and we'll see how active he is, and we'll see how much they use him to attack the backfield. As you said, day 3 of fall ball, we saw him get, they blew it dead before he got to the quarterback, but what would have been a sack, and I have not heard anyone get described as having a sack yet. I don't think, right? We haven't, no.
Right.
So,
Nope.
it's obviously it's day 3 of ball practice and doesn't count for anything yet, but I think they're going to be aggressive with him while he's out there. So yeah, I think your total tackle numbers are probably not going to be quite as high, but some of the, the impact plays that we talk about in terms of pass breakups and sacks and maybe an interception, no one has had a sack and no one has had an interception. I will probably take the over on 0.5 of those things, certainly combined, for Jay Timmons this year.
We have to assume that he's going to have fewer tackles than the number 3 linebacker because that's kind of the way it's gone currently. So you would have to think he's going to be under 30, except that third linebacker may be split between 2 guys. So, if there's 4 linebackers, then maybe they're all like at 27 tackles or something like that. Donte Whitner, 22 tackles, 1 forced fumble, 2 interceptions, 2 pass breakups. That feels like the interceptions, of course, that's kind of high for two, but 22 tackles, a forced fumble, 2 pass breakups, no tackles for loss. He'd get those later in his career. But now you jump from 37 to 22, and it feels like, man, that's low if you're the number 1 nickel.
Yeah, I think of all the numbers we've talked about so far, I think the Lorenzo Styles number is the ones that I'm kind of trending towards the most. 22, if he finishes with 22 tackles and he's the starting nickel and plays, even if it's 40% of the snaps this season at nickel, that is an incredible sign for what the future holds for me. Even if you look at that and you say only 22 tackles, like, no. 22 tackles. Like, you put some respect on those numbers there.
Yeah, right.
Where you're talking about a true freshman being a starter, or at least being a very, very regular rotation player at the very least, depending on how they use these different personnel groupings.
And
this is one thing where, you look at the average tackle numbers for even good true freshmen over recent years at corner, and I would bet most of them aren't over 10. So you get into the 20s, that's already impressive. And I think he's got a decent shot to get into the 30s.
well, and I'm just doing quickly the average of these 4 guys, and I can't do long division anymore, but you're talking like 33 tackles. So I feel like the average I might take over the Lorenzo Styles in this, because Lorenzo Styles, you said 12 games. You would expect Jay Timmons to play more than that, and you'd think one of those might be against Malachi Toney, and there's going to be like 19 tackles right there. So, and 6 or 7 tackles for loss, as we know. But just an interesting look at the club that he could be joining. The fact that he is the first freshman of fall camp to lose his black stripe. He is the 3rd freshman overall, joining Brock Boyd and Chris Henry Jr. And I'm trying not to talk too much about him at this point because we've talked about him in a few shows, but I did want to spend some time on him. One, as a listener question, and also the black stripe. And then I'm doing this research. I got to get it out there. I'm putting it on the message board as well. But it's like you and I were talking with Marcus Hartman today about all this research he has. It's like, well, you got to put it somewhere. This can't just be for me. I'm not that selfish. But anything else before we go?
just a couple more numbers to just sort of put some things in perspective. And, maybe this is going to make you want to trend your numbers down a little
What
bit.
about Jordan Hancock?
Well, so I was just looking at last year's numbers from guys who were second-year players. Aaron
Mm,
Scott, Bryce West, they both had 9 tackles last
mm.
year. Devin Sanchez last year, 15 tackles. So, those are all, and, we're saying that he's probably going to play more than Devin Sanchez. So I think he does exceed those numbers. But, those are, even like I said, even if he's in the 20s, I think those are really pretty respectable numbers, pretty good numbers for a true freshman. I can pull up Jordan Hancock's stats if you have not done that already.
Yeah, doing it right now. So that was 2024, as we all recall, and he finished with 48 tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, half a
Yeah.
sack, 8 pass breakups, 2 forced fumbles. 1 interception. That's a lot to ask. Although, Tom, what about Grayson Littleton, the true freshman last year, nickelback for Texas? Here are his numbers. Are you ready?
Mhm.
47 tackles, 2 interceptions, 3 tackles for loss, 6 pass breakups, 2 forced fumbles. That was a heck of a year, and he had
Mm.
a pretty darn good game against Ohio State as well.
Yeah. Yeah, those are really good numbers. And, just to put again the Jordan Hancock numbers in perspective, that was his senior year. That was not his
Yeah.
freshman year. That was his senior year. Even his junior year, 41 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, both of which were sacks and a couple interceptions. So, but that's a junior for a guy that was a really, really productive player for Ohio State. So, yeah, this is one where I think the numbers that you're thinking, oh boy, this would be a good season. Like I think the barometer for a good season is probably a lot lower than you would think it would be, just based on the fact you got to kind of grade on a curve for a true freshman. But again, the most important, the most telling piece of all of this is go back to the 4 names that Tony said with
Mhm.
the 4 guys who started at nickel as true freshmen. If you're in that club, that's probably a pretty good sign.
And so the average numbers from those guys, 33 tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, 1 forced fumble, 1 interception. That's the baseline. Either live up to it or don't. Really, now that you're here, gotta do something about it. No, uh, like any of those numbers, it's just, as you said, it's just being there and being a part and already having that kind of role and that kind of pressure and being able to handle it. So there you go. Those are our thoughts. What are your thoughts? Go ahead and throw those in the comments if you're watching on YouTube. If you are, hit that thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you've not yet done so. If you're listening, a 5-star rating and review is also appreciated. If you would like to talk more about this, you can find us over at BuckeyeInsiders.com. Sign up, become a member for the monthly price of a lousy chain store pizza. We're talking about this. We're talking about all sorts of stuff in camp, stuff we're hearing, stuff we're seeing. Would love to see you guys over there. So that will do it from here. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you all later.